something interesting happening in the country currently, particularly emerging from the consumption trends. And if we look at these trends, premium brands are flying off the shelves. But mass-priced products, particularly the discretionary spending, seems to be staggering. Now, what does this really mean? Is it a change in preferences and tastes? Is it inflation impact? Let's try and first understand what is unfolding. Categories like international travel, premium alcohol, and personal care seem to be performing better. Nielsen IQ, that specializes in consumer intelligence and market research, has said the non-food categories are growing faster, while the slow growth in the food sector is largely due to products falling under staples, which would largely mean like refined and non-refined edible oils. So the mass market is seen as households between 3 to 5 lakh rupee annual income. We're trying to differentiate between what is this mass market and the premium segment. And premium segment is seen as annual households with income between 10 to 15 lakh annually. Hindustan Unilever, India's largest consumer company that produces products like Dove, Horlicks, Lakme, among others, has said that its premium portfolio expanded more than 2.5 times the mass segment for a few quarters at least. Business consultants Alvarez and Marshall believe lower income households have been most impacted. High inflation has reduced the ability to spend on discretionary items. What could this really mean? It means, say for example, eating out seems to have reduced. At least that's what's emerging from firms that run Domino's, Pizza Hut in India. But that's not the case for premium goods, which is seeing an upward demand, as are the luxury goods. What does this really mean for India? Are there some concerns that we need to look into these trends? Is it a positive sign? Is it a negative sign? Is it worry over inflation? Are the preferences changing? So many questions that need to be answered. I'm being joined by Lord Matthias, who's a marketing expert, Dr. Vandana Singh, Director for Global Corporate Key, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, Senior Economist. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. Well, first, let me go across to you, Lord Matthias. How would you explain this? What would be the key takeaways? If you have to look at the top three key takeaways from what seems to be happening right now in the economy, particularly in the context of what seems to be an uptick in premium consumption, premium goods consumption, but a very staggered growth when it comes to the mass segment consumptions. What would be your top three key takeaways?
Thank you for having me on your show, Sneha. I think we are witnessing an interesting trend. I think there is activity on two ends of the market. At one level, clearly there seems to be clear polarization. What we are seeing is that people at the top end of the spectrum are obviously moving up the economic ladder very rapidly. I think this has accelerated to a large extent in the last 1 year. And therefore, we're seeing an uptick in terms of luxury goods, in terms of the high end. So there is, let's say, this I wouldn't say a small niche, but a reasonable niche of households ranging from about 2 to 2.5 crore households, where affordability is no longer an issue. And they're moving up the value curve. They're not just looking for standard goods, they're looking for experiences, they're looking for luxury goods. So that segment is seeing a huge uptick. The second, and albeit it's not reported so widely, is clearly there is an issue at people at the bottom of the pyramid. I think the pandemic took a toll, but clearly even issues thereafter. Most specifically, most recently, the 2023 monsoons being a little patchy. I think some of that has affected people at the bottom of the pyramid. So clearly you've seen an issue with consumption at the absolute base level. The third, I think, is a slightly more socio-cultural issue, which is also people are getting a little bit more mindful about consumption. I think what the lockdown period and the pandemic taught a lot of us, not just Indians, but across the globe, is people have become a little bit more circumspect, a little bit more, shall we say, a little bit more mindful about the things they consume. I think a combination of these three factors is really impacted. So one end, we're seeing uptick in luxury. Two, we're seeing a slowdown when it comes to mass market goods. FMCG companies are seeing a bit of a challenge. And thirdly, we're seeing consumers being slightly more rational in purchases and therefore looking at spends, especially the middle income group, looking at spends with far more, far more care and circumcision.
Right. Thank you very much, Lloyd Matthias, for putting those points. And let me get the introductory remarks from others as well. Dr. Vandana Singh, there've been a lot of changes when we look at travel industry over the last decade in India. But this seems to be very interesting. While there may be a segment that has seen a decline, travel, even for the non-premium segment, seems to be a preference. So how does one look into this? If you are saying that your discretionary, I mean, for the masses, if the discretionary spend is reducing, it doesn't seem to reduce when it comes to travel. Are there some underlyings that we need to understand here?
Sneha, very, very good question. And firstly, good evening to everyone here, and also to the distinguished panel speakers. This is a very pertinent but a very realistic question. Why? Because see what has happened in the last 2-3 years. What did the pandemic do? It put everybody, all of us, everybody in shock, big or small or medium. Everybody went into a shock. What came out next, the moment everything was lifted, everybody went into a sort of a revenge, a sort of a travel. If you look at travel and trade and travel and tourism, you see that nothing is impacting it. It's just growing and growing and growing. You look at the domestic trajectory is going up. You look at people flocking towards religious spots, it's going up and up. There is no divide. You look at people going for short breaks, they want to go out. They want to spend that time out. They want to see the places. They want to see the world, whether it's long haul, whether it's short haul, whether it's Middle East, Southeast Asia, Europe, whether it's Ayodhya, they want to go. So there is no such, fall in that segment, and that will not fall. For this very reason, because one doesn't know what will happen next. And everybody wants to go for this reason that, when the e-commerce is there, they can easily order. They can order shoes, they can order a Zara, they can order whatever they want to. But when it comes to high end and when it comes to travel, that is something they have to feel, see, touch, go. And that's the way I look at it. And that is why this segment is not going to see a downfall. I want to say one more thing. You look at people who go for Hajj, for example, or Hajj or Umrah, they save money, all their money, just to go for that religious travel. So don't you think that people would like to go to Ayodhya in India, or for that matter to other religious spots? So this travel and trade and tourism is going to continue to rise. Right now it's at 30%, 18% over the pre-pandemic levels, if I may say so. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, there's a lot of politics around inflation. It's, of course, become a huge election issue as well and is only going to be brought up time and again. But as an economist, what do you look at in terms of the trends that's happening currently? Is this course correction or is this a concern? Or both?
I don't know what course correction we're talking about. First of all, good evening to you and to all our panelists and to your viewers. It's actually a reflection of the fact that joblessness increased very sharply over the last 5 years. We already had in 2017-18, prior to COVID, a slowing economy, which then contracted by twice as much as the world economy contracted in FY21, and then it has recovered. But we are still way below the trajectory of growth that we were on, before the slowdown began in 2017. So the point is that there has been a recovery, not a V-shaped one, unlike what government economists would like us all to believe, but a K-shaped one. And that's what both the panelists have been, in their own different ways and very appropriate ways, been telling us. Because over 50% of the population have seen that their incomes have either shrunk or they've stagnated. Joblessness is at a record high, and real wages have stagnated. I've demonstrated this in my pieces in the media. Now, if that's the situation, then consumption at the bottom of the pyramid, and that it's not just bottom. We are talking about the 50 to 60%, the lower quintiles of the population. And on the other hand, listed companies have seen profits at a record high, seven-year highs in listed company profits. Corporate profit rates have been brought down since 2019. So clearly, those in the organized sector and those in the top echelons are coming back. The word revenge was used. Consumption with a certain revenge, travel with a certain revenge, because it was very tepid. People were confined. People were not eating out, and because for the top end, savings increased on account of that. They didn't travel. They weren't eating out, etc. For them, the savings increased. However, savings as a proportion of GDP have actually contracted, which is the reason why real consumption in the economy is actually not growing. So there you are. It's a K-shaped recovery, and you're seeing all the evidence of it, and that's really what's happening.
Right. Lloyd Matthias, so is this then now becoming just another version of what has been India's perpetual problem over the last few decades? That is, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Is this another story, or another wine in the same vineyard? How do you explain this? It seems to be just a repeat.
To me.
Yes, Lloyd Matthias. How are brands looking at this? Is it just the same story? Are they looking at the same thing?
Yeah, I think, Sneha, what you're saying is partially true. I think the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And as Dr. Mehrotra rightly pointed out, I think two aspects are hitting the poor. I think one is unemployment numbers are up. Though the numbers are gray from various sources, depending on which source you look at, but there's clear evidence to prove that unemployment is an issue. I think that's one aspect. In terms of brands, I think the two ends of it. I think one, certain premium brands, certain luxury brands have learned to really kind of thrive on this particular rebound phenomena. Dr. Vandana Singh talked about the fact that travel is seeing a huge bump up, specifically in the upper end where people are actually consuming experiences. So international travel, spiritual travel, of course, has taken off, religious travel. So that's huge. The other end, I think a lot of brands have recognized that the mass market, which is struggling to consume, given issues of unemployment to some extent, and two is really the knockout punch that the pandemic delivered. I think the realization for a lot of mass market FMCG brands is how to ensure that the new, shall we say, consumer who's struggling with incomes, how does he make good? You have to recognize that the government has continued with its free rations for, I think, 30 or 40%, the bottom part of the population. But aside from that, I think it's about the fact that FMCG brands will need to redouble their efforts in terms of how they reach the consumer. One saw a couple of decades back the whole issue of, the fact that a lot of them had downsized. They'd created much smaller packs, sachets and such like, that made it easy for the poor to consume. I think that's one area that needs worked at quite significantly. The other is really hoping that some elements of the recovery kick in, right? We've had a bad monsoon, that's a little behind us. I think now with election season, with the fact that governments will tend to loosen purse strings, both at the center and state levels, and therefore a lot of monies are going to be hopefully flowing to the bottom. I think that will also possibly play a role. But yes, brands will have a challenge. And I think for the short term, and specifically the FMCG category, will be very circumspect about their prospects when it comes to the calendar year starting FY 24-25.
Right. In fact, Dr. Vandana, just to build on what both the other panelists have been talking, if you look at the consumer sentiment, we've just put these things together based on different quotes that have emerged from different segments. And I don't intend to make this technical, but just to give us a sense of what's happening across segments, because, it's not just about one segment, one sector, it's across the industry. What seems to be emerging right now is a very cautious approach to mass discretionary spending. The impact on retail, it's very muted growth, even in the apparel industry for some matter. Eating out trends have fallen drastically, is what we are being told, not for the gourmet sector. It's for the ordinary people, for the mass discretionary, as it were. So you have, over the last, say, 2 months or 3 months, you've had outlets say that, pizza, say Domino's and Pizza Huts, the expansions have not happened the way they're supposed to happen. If you look at the sluggishness in staples, where we talk about refined oil or other staple foods, it's also seen a dip. Now, when you look at all these things and you see, say, the travel industry really on a high, how are industries looking at this? Because at the end of the day, the consumers are kings. If you are not spending in that sector, is this worrying largely for an economy? Because it can't really be that one sector will thrive while the other may be staggering or sluggish. So there is an inherent contradiction in both of these, and that is perhaps very important to understand where the Indian economy is heading to.
Also by the two other distinguished panelists. But here we have to see that we have to keep this balance. Now, I talked a lot about e-commerce, and you see that e-commerce is not just happening across the globe, but also big time in India. And people choose the comfort of their home to order something small or something big, whether it is to eat or whether it is to wear. And yes, as FMCG brands have to do a lot of thinking. Retail also has to do a lot of thinking. But at the same time, when it comes to travel, trade, and tourism, this is going nonstop. But we can't say that there is no balance. There is a balance there. The middle class definitely is having that power to do it all. But that they choose to visit places, short breaks, or companies intend to have these kind of meetings where they can have everything from meetings to incentives to conferences to exhibitions and combine it at a place, then that makes sense to the traveler, to the company, and a whole lot as such. So that gets combined. But when it comes to retail, then really, as I can see now, shoppers stop. They really have to rethink how they want to reach to the customer, or how they want to incentivize, or how they want to invite the customer really to come and buy, when the same thing, which is right now, as I saw, selling for $6.99, is available for, let's say, $5.99 or $4.99 if it comes to your doorstep. So it's just that, are we even measuring e-commerce and how high it is growing and how high it is booming? We need to measure that too, in my view.
Okay. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, would you want to respond to that perspective also? There is this argument that is thrown in by many that, listen, and, that Dr. Vandana also pointed towards that. Is it all is well, as some are claiming, or some even pointing out that, listen, there are changes in preferences, changes in tastes, or is it something far more complex and something that should be very worrying for the Indian economy? Why I ask this? Because if there is sectoral imbalance, and if there is change in the way consumption is happening, particularly when it comes to the mass discretionary. Now, as some may argue, this is not the essentials that the mass segment needs to be consuming. These are discretionary, and it could be used in some other segment as well. It may not necessarily be at the mass segment. But is it as simple as that? Can one go with such a simple logic?
Let me explain why this is very serious and why this is worrying. You see, the vast majority of this country's population are obviously not visiting the shops that you're showing. The vast majority don't even have a smartphone. Yes, the share of the population which has a smartphone has grown dramatically, no question. But do you think
Drastically,
all
yes.
smartphone owners are actually accessing Amazon or even local vendors through? No. The bottom line is they don't have the discretionary money. Why? Because joblessness has increased, and secondly, wages are not rising. And if you were to look at the youth unemployment numbers, and they are pretty rock solid, I can tell you, by the way. You do not go by what the government's estimates are. The government's estimates are not internationally compliant. The CMI estimates are perfectly internationally compliant. And you know what the youth unemployment rates are? They're in 20 to 24 age group, it's 44%. But even the government's youth unemployment rates are over 20%. So what is that telling you? That consumption
And
at the
Dr.
bottom
Santosh Mehrotra,
50%
just to
is not
add to what you're saying, we also are staring at a major layoff issue. I mean, this is only going to possibly aggravate in months to come, layoffs across the sectors.
Yeah. Why do you think private investment is not growing? Private investment consistently for the last 9 or 10 years is below what this government inherited, which was 31% of GDP in 2013-14. In no year in the last 10 has investment to GDP come anywhere close to 31%. Public investment, yes, it's been growing, but it cannot compensate for private. And private is not growing because the animal spirits are not there. People are taking their money out. They don't want to invest, and that's why the new jobs are not happening. That's why real wages are not growing. That's why consumption is not growing. It's very straightforward. It's much deeper.
Lloyd Matthias, how would you like to say that? I mean, you have an economist here who's saying, listen, the animal instinct is totally missing. The private investments are at an all-time low, possibly. How would you look at this?
At one level, I think Dr. Mehrotra makes a valid point that there's a definite slowdown, and people at the lower end of the spectrum are obviously getting impacted. The other point, clearly, there's no denying, is that unemployment is a key factor in this. But to look at a doomsday scenario and look at this as, everything is very gloomy for the economy, I think maybe overstating it a bit. And the reason I say so is with the K-shaped growth curve, what's happening is there is a sizable consumption at one end of the spectrum, albeit small, and there is a drop in the other end of the spectrum, which traditionally tends to be large. I think that's the reality. However, there are a lot of balancing happens because of that, because at one end, there is a rise in consumption. The second point I want to point to a small social trend is that even people among better incomes, which are the people in the middle incomes, have become a lot more circumspect about things they consume. And this, I would put it down to the pandemic effect. People have suddenly realized there are so many things they can do without, right? Is eating out once a week, a good idea? Should we not do it? That combined with the fact that health and wellness has now become an issue. With the pandemic, people have come to terms with mortality. People have become far more focused. A lot of people are very, very, very conscious about the kind of food they're making mindful choices. I think these are some of the factors that are also coming into play. So it's not all, doom and gloom. I really believe that things will even out to an extent. I believe a lot of the money that will come in during the election cycle will actually trickle down. And I think those things are going to make a difference. But yes, I totally agree that right now there is a sharp polarization, which clearly is not good for our economy.
Right. Sandeep Mehrotra, before I just go over to Dr. Vandana again, how do you look at this becoming an election issue? I'm asking you this for a very simple question. For the people who are watching this, they are going to be the voters in few months from now. How should they be looking at this? I mean, this is not some armchair discourse that is happening. That is not the intent of what we are doing. How should this be panning out in the elections? Do you see this being taken up by the political parties as something that may need to take, whether it be the ruling or the opposition? And how should the voters be reacting to this?
Sneha, the question is to me, am I right?
No, I'm asking Dr. Sandeep Mehrotra. I'm talking to Sandeep Mehrotra. I'll just get back to you, Dr. Vandana.
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, Santosh Mehrotra. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Point is that this is worrying. That's what I'm saying. And for the vast majority of voters, it is worrying. It's not worrying for Mr. Matthias, Dr. Singh, and myself, and for Sneha. But for the vast majority, it is. That's what I'm trying to say. And please try and appreciate that the growth rate of the economy has been consistently lower. Even before COVID, it has actually, we are the fastest growing large economy because the rest of the world is growing slower. There is a process of deglobalization going
Right.
on, so we shouldn't expect to be able to export more, even if we produce more. Therefore, we need to be worried about a domestic market actually continuously expanding. If the domestic market doesn't continuously expand, investment will not rise, and hence consumption will not rise. That's the kind of economy you want to see.
Right.
So voters should try and see what, in fact, has been the outcome for them. This inflation is actually government inflicted, with all due respect. You don't have to have petrol and diesel taxes at the rate at which you are, which is feeding into every other product, including food. If you were to cut taxes when your oil prices are at $80, you can actually cut.
Okay.
The government has had a windfall gain on account of the oil prices coming down. For 8 of the 10 years that this government has been in power, oil prices have been consistently lower than in the preceding 10 years. And yet, for us, you and me,
Right.
the oil prices are not. You and I don't worry about the 100 rupees a litre. The vast majority does.
No, absolutely fair enough, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra. And in fact, apologies to you for the earlier little mess up that I did with the name, and it definitely matters a lot. To you, Dr. Vandana Singh, last question, and that's a genuine thing that many would be asking. We may look at the luxury segment, we may look at the premium segment, we may look at, say, even the travel industry, which is a discretionary industry when it comes to the mass engagement. I mean, they don't really have the strength to propel an economy. They may be doing great and good for them, but they can't propel the economy, the direction of the economy in the direction that they need to take. How would the unemployment that is being spoken of, would the inflation that is being reflected across, and we have the numbers for, say, last 10 years, the fluctuations that have happened over the last 7 months as well, if we can just have a look at that, both these sectors are out. No sector can be just isolated of all of this, right? I mean, would there be concerns for even, say, the travel industry when you look at what's happening in other sectors? I mean, no industry is insulated, isn't it? Dr. Vandana?
Yes, Sneha, you're absolutely right. I also agree with Lloyd as well as with Dr. Mehrotra. But please first, let's look at the state of the world. What is the state of the world? Please see what's happening at one point in the US, that UK went recently officially into recession, which was just a few days back that they made the announcement. The state of war in Europe, what's happening between Israel, the Middle East, Palestine crisis, see the Red Sea crisis, see all of it, and then put India on one side. Look at the fact that we still, that's why I agree here with Dr. Mehrotra. I would never look, and Lloyd as well, don't look at doom and gloom. Look at the fact that we are sitting in a country, yes, there is unemployment, but is it to that extent where we are going into sort of a recession? Are we in that state? No. Our domestic consumerism is so high that we will always continue to spend big or small. Is the balance there? No, the balance is not there. People are going for spiritual travel, people are going for health travel, people are taking short breaks, people are doing whatever they can because the pandemic was a shock and they don't know what comes next. Looking at the situation and globally, what happens next to India, this is the election year. yes, the parties will make hue and cry about the unemployment, but then compare us with the rest of the world and tell us where we are.
All
Yes,
right.
we are the fastest growing economy.
Okay.
Yes, we have 244 airports coming up. And yes, people are going to 3-tier and 4-tier and 5-tier cities. That is also tourism. But that is
All right.
small. Yeah.
Okay.
And yes, let's get the balance. I agree with you. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Sneha.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. In fact, the truth remains it's very hard to distinguish economy in just black and white. And perhaps the attempt here is to bring the discourse out, very importantly, with different perspectives and trying to understand the trends that are emerging from different sectors in the economy, because quite frankly, it's those tales that can be very telling and giving the direction in which the economy is heading. And we believe the viewers could be well equipped to take their own decisions with very informed information which our panelists have made. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And moving on,